Orthodox rabbis see Planet X as a sign of Messiah's arrival. A researcher proves that the Bible is more bloodthirsty than the Quran, and get ready, the internet could wake up and become self-aware. This is SkyWatch TV for Tuesday, February 23rd, 2016. I'm Derek Gilbert. First up, proving once again that watching the foreign policy team of the Obama administration is like observing a drunk college sophomore playing a game of Risk. Secretary of State John Kerry traveled to Hollywood recently for a secret meeting with movie studio executives to brainstorm ways to counter the narrative of the Islamic State, trying to figure out what draws new fighters to its cause. Present were executives from Warner Brothers, DreamWorks Animation, the Walt Disney Company, 20th Century Fox, NBC Universal, and Sony Pictures Entertainment. Counter the ISIS narrative. Really? Movie studio executives advising the Secretary of State on how to counter the narrative, the marketing of the most vicious and dangerous group of men on the planet. If this was parody, it couldn't be any more ridiculous than this. Now, confronted by a group that's drawing upon 1,400 years of violent history and official religious doctrine, from which we might be able to draw some useful conclusions about what motivates the Islamic State, the Secretary of State travels to Hollywood and talks with men whose only experience is defeating imaginary enemies on a screen to talk about narrative. Hashtag clueless. In Syria, a setback for regime forces. Rebels cut the supply line between the city of Aleppo to the southeast Monday. This was the only route that was open to troops loyal to Syria's President Bashar al-Assad. If they can't retake the road, it could slow down the advances made in the countryside around Aleppo against rebel groups. The war on cash continues. Now the New York Times weighing in and joining the chorus, calling for the elimination of the $100 bill. It's the same story. They want to ban the Benjamins because the only people who use them are corrupt politicians, drug dealers, and terrorists, and tax cheats. And besides, there are so few people who use it, so many other ways to pay for things, electronically of course, that it wouldn't cause any problems for honest people. Look, physical currency is about privacy and freedom. The government doesn't need to know everything that you spend your money on, but it's the technocrat's dream to force us into being electronically tracked, everything that we buy, everything we consume, so they can properly balance production and consumption. This, of course, will be very, very useful to a prophesied one world government, which we know is coming. A couple of quick political notes. Popular radio host Glenn Beck fasting for Senator Ted Cruz. This is a response to Donald Trump's win in the South Carolina primary over the weekend. Beck also expressed his belief last week that the death of Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was a message from God to the American people, a wake-up call that our liberty is very close to being lost because the Constitution is hanging by a thread. Now, if that phrase sounds familiar to you, it should, because that is part of the so-called White Horse prophecy that was purportedly uttered by Joseph Smith, the founder of the Church of Latter-day Saints in 1846, I believe it was. With all due respect to Mr. Beck, and I do respect his talent, he is a gifted speaker, a very intelligent man, extremely talented, very entertaining. But I think it's apparent to anybody who's paying attention these last couple of decades that our liberty was already hanging by a thread here in the United States. We as Christians really need to be more concerned with our eternal security rather than our security here in this time-space continuum. But when a Mormon uses the phrase, Constitution hanging by a thread, just pay attention. It's not official doctrine of the Church of Latter-day Saints, but there are quite a few Mormons who believe it. And when Mr. Beck uses that phrase, it leads us to believe that he may see the Church of Latter-day Saints as the group that is to save the United States and save the Constitution from the forces of progressivism. Again, I tend to have a little more pessimistic view based on Bible prophecy that we are headed towards a one-world government. And whether we save the Constitution by appointing a conservative justice to the Supreme Court or not, our work needs to be about making disciples of all nations by preaching the gospel of sin and salvation. the shed blood of Jesus Christ. Now, to the other side of the aisle, Hillary Clinton sounded positively Clintonian in an interview last week, talking to Scott Pelley of NBC. She said, "I don't believe I've ever lied to the American public." She also said, "I've always tried to tell the truth, always, always, and I'm going to do the best I can to level with the American people." Clintonian, weasel words. Believe I've told the truth, try to level. Americans, our salvation will not come at the ballot box. Something else, and this is not news, but I just noticed it, mainly because the human actors are not the real powers and principalities at work behind the initiatives we see in the news each day. You know those black framed glasses that Mrs. Clinton wears from time to time? Apparently, they're outfitted with something called a Fresnel prism. This was first noticed back in 2013 by keen-eyed observers. These Fresnel prisms are used exclusively for treating double vision. Now, you might remember in December of 2012, Mrs. Clinton fainted and hit her head as she fell. She missed several weeks of work, missed testifying in the Benghazi hearings to explain to the American people why Ambassador Stevens and 3 other Americans were killed when Islamists overran the consulate in Benghazi. To be honest with you, I thought she was just trying to get out of having to appear before Congress, but she did miss several weeks of work, and in fact, a doctor found a blood clot in the space between her skull and her brain. But here, more than 3 years later, she apparently still wearing glasses to correct for double vision. Now, I know Mrs. Clinton has wanted to be president for a long time. She is nothing if not ambitious, but a president who suffers from double vision may have health concerns that we should factor into our decision about who to vote for. Speaking of candidates for president, the Transhumanist Party's candidate believes the internet could become self-aware. Now, this might not be as crazy as it sounds. Zoltan Istvan, writing in an op-ed piece last week, said that any system that grows in complexity eventually reaches some organized and possibly self-aware consciousness. This is an idea that was first floated by, really popularized by the Jesuit priest Father Pierre Teilhard de Chardin back in the mid-20th century. He believed that all beings would move gradually toward a higher and higher levels of complexity and consciousness until at some point the entire universe wakes up, which he called the omega point, very much like the singularity popularized by Dr. Raymond Kurzweil. Now, of course, this ignores the fact that this has never been seen before in all of history. See, the theory of Darwinian evolution starts with the conclusion that you and I exist and we think, so therefore we must have evolved from a lower life form that grew more complex until we became sentient. Istvan speculates, furthermore, that the internet may be useful to aliens, extraterrestrials, who tinker with the web, beaming some sort of code to the internet in order to become self-aware and monitor and perhaps even guide the evolution of the human race, to keep us from doing something stupid like blowing up the planet or taking our warlike tendencies out into the galaxy. His argument is that this scenario is no less crazy than believing that God, or Allah if you're a Muslim, will someday return to earth and reward the believers and smite the unbelievers. Of course, that is a very broad generalization, but essentially that's the eschatological belief of billions of people on planet Earth. And then he argues that the sheer number of galaxies in the universe means that the odds are pretty good that aliens are out there, ergo they're watching us, ergo they'll try to control us by making our internet a sentient being. That anything, his conclusion, anything over a long enough time frame is theoretically probable. By the way, prophetically speaking, he might be correct. It is not outside the realm of possibility that the image of the beast that wakes up, the image of the beast that causes people to worship the beast after he suffers that head wound, could be an artificial intelligence. That's not a new idea to me, by the way. Theologian E.W. Bullinger, 100 years ago, after hearing about the work of Nikola Tesla, speculated this in his commentary on the book of Revelation. So anyway, Mr. Istvan is not alone in this kind of worldview, believing that the sheer volume of the universe, the number of galaxies, stars, planets out there, means that there must be life out there somewhere. However, just because something is mathematically possible doesn't mean it's likely. Just as it's mathematically probable that the Chicago Cubs should have won the World Series at some point over the last 100 years. First of all, regardless of how crazy it sounds, we have the eyewitness testimony of those who saw the risen Jesus. And I could do an hour of discussing the evidence for the truth claims of Christianity, why we can believe that the documents have been accurately preserved, not forged, not faked. The bottom line is that the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the best attested event in human history. And if we throw that out because we don't believe the evidence, then using the same standard, we would have to forget everything we think we know about the ancient world, period. Furthermore, in spite of these so-called odds, a new study indicates that the Earth does in fact appear to be absolutely unique in all of creation. This is based on computer simulations run by an astronomer at Uppsala University in Sweden. He found when he plugged in the numbers, of course he had to make some assumptions about the way the universe was created and so forth, which frankly aren't biblical, but still, when he ran the simulation, he found that none, that is zero, of the 700 quintillion possible planets in the universe resemble the Earth. Now, it's almost as though, and I hesitate to say it for fear of sounding like a creationist, but it's almost as though the Earth was specifically designed to be unique, huh? Now, the co-author of this study from Carnegie Observatories in California said that there are plenty of uncertainties in the modeling, so we shouldn't draw any conclusions from this, not read too much into it. But it does appear, he said, that the Earth is, and I quote, a mild violation of the Copernican principle, end quote. That's an understatement. The Copernican principle is the principle that that the Earth is not special or unique in the universe. It's science, so it must be true. Another new proclamation of Messiah's imminent arrival coming from prominent Orthodox rabbis in Israel. Rabbi Moshe Sternbuch, who I've mentioned here before, says that the Zohar mentions a star that will appear at the end of days. Now, the Zohar is the principal mystical text in Judaism. It's the foundational document of Kabbalah. This prophecy, I'll put that in air quotes, says that at the time Messiah is revealed, a star will rise in the east, surrounded by 7 other stars that will make war on it 3 times a day for 70 days. Now, in addition to this, rabbis investigating the Hebrew texts of the Torah for sequential letter numbering, I'm certainly not an expert on this, but looking at Torah codes, keep finding letter sequences in the Torah, a couple specifically from the book of Deuteronomy referring to the threat of a star, and one even mentions the word Nibiru. Rabbi Matahayu Glazerson, who's a prominent Torah codes expert researcher, said the codes point to a date in March of 2016, Jewish year 5776. So we'll know in a few weeks whether there is any merit to this prophecy. Now, for the record, I'll say again that we don't believe any prophecy that is not specifically contained in the Bible, written in words that the average reader can. In other words, you don't need a computer program to check for the sequences of the letters in order to find prophecies hidden in the Bible. God put all the ones that we need in there for you and me to read. We may not understand them clearly until after they've come to pass, but they are there and they will be fulfilled. But we look at these things to understand what these rabbis believe, what their followers believe, to better understand their worldview, and perhaps find opportunities to share the gospel. Christ died for them too. And they need to know that when the Messiah appears, the real one, will have already been here once before, 2,000 years ago. One final note, film producer Richard Shaw, who has produced a DVD, a documentary on this research called Torah Codes End to Darkness, will be a guest on SkyWatchTV coming up, assuming we're still here, sometime in April or May. And finally, a research marketer published a study last week that got some attention in the media, claiming that the Bible is more bloodthirsty than the Quran. No surprise that this study was published in the Huffington Post, Yahoo News, and other liberal news outlets as scientific proof that the Bible is more violent than the Quran. The study makes the claim, or at least cites other research that shows 58% of Americans have an unfavorable view of Islam. The claim, of course, is that we have an unfavorable view because of misrepresentations about the Quran. So now, if a skeptic brings up this story to you, which may happen, just ask this simple question: in what context do these references to violence appear in the Bible and in the Quran? In what context? They probably don't know. In the Bible, most of the violence in there, references to violence, are referring to historical events. In the Quran, the violence is usually a point of doctrine. In other words, this study was a simple word search, made no difference between the martyrdom of Stephen and the words of Allah, quoting, "I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieved, so strike them upon the necks and strike from them every fingertip," end quote. That's, by the way, there's a long and time-honored tradition in Islam of beheadings. Nor does this study account for all the violence called for from believers in the hadiths, which are purportedly collections of sayings of Muhammad. So the author of the study, Tom Anderson, admits that this is a superficial study. Okay, so he puts that disclaimer out there. This is superficial, and I quote, "Findings are by no means intended to be conclusive," which means, in other words, you can't draw any conclusions from this study. It's just an interesting intellectual exercise. But of course, the media is either unable or unwilling to draw that distinction because it doesn't fit with the politically correct and historically ignorant narrative that Islam is a religion of peace. Well, it's Tuesday, which means it is Twofer Tuesday. Been waiting for years to say that. Old Top 40 radio days. SkyWatch TV twice today, 6:30 p.m. Central Time on the Victory Television Network. That's for you if you live in Arkansas or in the Memphis area. And at 8:30 p.m. Central Time on the Christian Television Network, which is on satellite TV, DirecTV Channel 376, Dish Network Channel 267, the Glory Star Satellite Channel 117. Program this week, Reverend Dr. Robert Bennett, back again to talk about his books, I Am Not Afraid, and Afraid, Demonic Possession and Spiritual Warfare in America. Tonight, again, 6:30 p.m. on the Victory Television Network, 8:30 p.m. on the Christian Television Network. Also, later this week, tomorrow afternoon on the Cornerstone Network, 3:30 p.m. Central Time, and then Saturday, twice on Saturday, 3:30 p.m. on the Victory Television Network, and 7:30 p.m. on the Christian Television Network. Again, all those times Central. And of course, you can watch it on the SkyWatch TV channel on Roku. If you need instructions on adding the SkyWatch TV channel to your account, log on to skywatchtv.com/Roku. During the month of February, while supplies last, our gift to you for your financial support of any amount this month is this resin stone look cross. Looks like stone is what I'm trying to say, carved with the central message of the gospel. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. You know the verse. Again, for your donation of any amount to SkyWatch TV, this is our gift to you. For instructions on how to donate, log on to skywatchtv.com/donate. When you go to skywatchtv.com, you'll notice in the very top of the page there is a big banner asking for your help. The documentary film produced by SkyWatch TV and Defender Films, Inhuman, The Next and Final Phase of Man is Here, nominated in the People's Choice category for the 37th Annual Telly Awards. Click on that banner. That will take you to the website for the Telly Awards where you can rate the film. You'll also get a chance to watch a 10-minute sample, the first 10 minutes of Inhuman. We'd appreciate your support, your rating there, and doing so helps spread the word about the transhumanist movement and the message that this 21st century sci-fi religion seeks to spread. And of course, just by clicking on these various places on the internet, you can help SkyWatch TV spread the word, Facebook, Twitter, and of course, subscribing to our YouTube feed. And I was correct, it is over here, the little subscribe button if you're watching on our YouTube channel. You can also follow me on the internet, Twitter, Facebook, my website, and my email address, dgilbert at skywatchtv.com. Thanks for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.
From the time she was little, Nita dreamed of horses. Every childhood fantasy rode on the back of a heroic white steed, coming to save the day.
I don't know how long I've had this love in my heart for horses. It's just always been there. And when we were little girls, my sister and I would play all day long. I was always the white horse and she was always the little pink pig.
Let's pretend Lightning and Rosie can fly.
But everything changed in a heartbeat. On December 9th, 1971, a tragic car accident claimed the life of my dad and my best friend and my little sister. And I wondered after that if there was anything left to believe in.
Move aside, let the ambulance through. Please move aside.
As a child of 13, I felt like I had lost practically everything. And I wondered, is this it? I mean, where do I go from here? I could not have imagined back then how God could use horses, of all things, to restore my faith and vision for the future.
Starting April 19th, get your copy of Nita Horn's inspirational new book, No Fences, and learn for the first time her amazing story of loss, survival, determination, and healing. How the vision and love God gave her for these beautiful and majestic animals eventually led to the 150-acre Whispering Ponies Ranch, a general retreat facility, as well as a premier training location that specializes in using and gifting therapeutic animals to benefit the herding. Other care facilities, schools, and ministries across the nation.
When God puts something in your heart, it's there for a lifetime.